This is New Day. Allison is off. Poppy Harlow is joining me for this week. It's good to have you. Need you here. President Trump is under fire for once again blaming both sides for the violence that killed a woman in Charlottesville. The president's condemnation of white supremacists on Monday seemingly rendered meaningless because he once again equated the actions of hateful racists with those protesting against them.
So Republicans in Congress are united in denouncing hate, but very few are calling out the president by name and laying this in his lap. Newspapers this morning around the country rebuking President Trump with scathing headlines, blistering editorials, as this nation today mourns the death of Heather Heyer, her memorial service to be held in just hours. And another American city, this time Baltimore, removes Confederate monuments overnight.
All right. The president, his press conference yesterday, wasn't even supposed to be about this topic, but became all about it for him, the media, and the country. Here's a little bit of it. The president in his own words.
Well, I do think there's blame. Yes, I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. What about the alt left that came charging at him? Excuse me. What about the alt left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt right? Do they have any semblance of guilt? Let me ask you this. What about the fact they came charging with clubs in their hands, swinging clubs? Do they have any problem? I think they do.
All right, let's bring in our panel, CNN politics reporter and editor-at-large, Chris Cillizza, CNN senior political commentator and former Obama senior advisor, David Axelrod, and anchor of CNN Tonight, Don Lemon. The president's factual basis about this being like equal combatants on the ground. Our sister network, HBO, was on the ground there. Vice took footage. We want to show you. Here's what was being said and done on the ground.
Spread ideas, talk, in the hopes that somebody more capable will come along and do that. Somebody like Donald Trump, who does not give his daughter to a Jew.
So Donald Trump, but like more racist.
A lot more racist than Donald Trump. I don't think that you could feel about race the way I do and watch that Kushner bastard walk around with that beautiful girl.
Don, the president wants to talk about the fact basis here. Just to be clear, yeah, they had a permit. But this was supposed to be moved to a different site. They didn't want it moved. They actually won the legal battle because they wanted this congested. They wanted this to be as provocative as possible. They wound up being cited for unlawful assembly because of what happened. But this really isn't about the facts, right? This is about moral agency. What do you make of the president saying it's wrong on both sides?
No one has a permit to hate, right? And for hateful behavior. We all know the history of the Klan. We all know the history of white supremacy. And as I watched the president yesterday, all I could think of was this is a ramblings of a very ill-informed, ignorant man who's ignorant of the history of this country, of the facts of what went on the ground, and who obviously is saying exactly what is in his heart when he is not on teleprompter. This is what he believes. There is no other way around it. He said it in so many terms after being questioned about it over and over and over again. He is ill-informed. He doesn't know the history of this country. He should go back to school and get an elementary history education of what the difference is between a hate group and a protest group who is protesting fascism and who's protesting racism and bigotry. It is a sad state of affairs in this country right now when you have a president of the United States defending bigots, defending the offspring of the Ku Klux Klan in this country.
David Axelrod, you worked in the White House, and there's a big question this morning as we watch the people around the president, his cabinet members like Gary Cohn, like Steve Mnuchin, who are both Jewish, standing by the president, General Kelly, chief of staff, with his arms crossed. Glenn Thrush of the New York Times is reporting this morning, he just tweeted that Gary Cohn, who heads the NEC, is Jewish, was disgusted and upset, both in quotes, by the president's comments on white nationalists, according to 3 different people with knowledge. Okay, that's one thing. And then what do you do about it? You worked in the White House. If you fundamentally disagree with what the president has done, can you stand by? Should you stand by?
Look, I think a lot of people are going to have to wrestle with that question. I have a sense that some of these people are telling themselves, look, I'm the thin blue line between an unstable president and the rest of the world, and therefore I should stay here and try and guide him. And the question is, how much can he be guided? But let me just say generally, you know, I share in the outrage and disappointment. I'm the son of a Jewish refugee, so I very much feel that. But I'm not surprised, because this is exactly who the president was when he was running for president. He retweeted neo-Nazi tweets. He retweeted white supremacist tweets. He said things that caused Speaker Ryan to say last year that he had engaged in the textbook of a racist comment. You know, and so now he is who he is. Michelle Obama said in her convention speech, the presidency doesn't change you, it reveals you. This is who Donald Trump is. So the question is, who are we? Who are we now as a country, and how are we going to react to this? He is not going to change, but are we going to react to what he has said and done, and to this sort of embrace of racism? And that is a question for Republicans. It's a question for Democrats. It's a question for all of us.
Yeah, well, Chris Cillizza, David Axelrod just mentioned Paul Ryan. Who's that? I haven't heard from him. He tweeted. They're saying, well, we're on vacation now. I mean, what is going on here right now? He didn't even mention the president by name. John McCain did in his tweet. But I mean, look, again, the job is to fight injustice and to reinforce morality, to stand firm. How do these men and women justify being so quiet? We couldn't get them on television this morning. This wasn't to defend the health care bill that doesn't make a lot of sense, according to the CBO and others. This is about moral agency and about fighting hate. And we got one congressman, Scott Taylor of Virginia, who came on and said the president was wrong. He failed yesterday. None of them would even come on.
They're cowards. They're cowards. That's why. They're cowards.
They don't want to talk about it, and they should. Because, again, I think you're seeing this in a political light, just like Donald Trump was trying to paint it. Well, on the one side, people do this, on the other side, people do that, which is just, frankly, not true. And as Don rightly pointed out, on the one side, you have hate-filled people who want to eliminate people because of what they believe or what they look like. On the other side, you have people who don't agree with that viewpoint. That is not a reasonable argument. When you try to put it in a political context, place it on a political spectrum, I'm sure their advisors say, stay away from this. This is radioactive. You talking about neo-Nazism, white supremacy, and Donald Trump is a 100% stone cold loser. The problem here is that this isn't a political issue. It really isn't. I mean, of course, we're talking about it in the context of politics because Donald Trump's the president of the United States. But this is moral. This is a moral issue of moral leadership. Can we condemn things as a society that are based on hate and intolerance? And the answer to that has to be yes, right? I'd remind people, this Republican Party, Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, lots of other folks, I went through 2 days ago, before this press conference, I went through and found 9 instances in which some, many, or all of them denounced, ran away from, said they could not support Donald Trump over the past 2 years, to David Axelrod's point. This is not new, and yet here we are pushing his health care bill. At some point, I do think you have to stand up and say, this isn't about politics. This is about morality. This is about doing what is right, and this is clearly wrong. Now, where do you go from there? Because Donald Trump ain't changing, right? So where do you take that as a Paul Ryan or Mitch McConnell? It is harder to determine, but I do think you need to stand up and say, this isn't what we are.
Can we just stop beating around the bush here? And because let's just be honest. Us New Yorkers, we've known who Donald Trump was for a very long time. We've known with the Central Park Five. We've known with the housing discrimination. We've known with him and pushing the whole birther thing, which is a bunch of bull. We've known that. We know now why he's so upset. For those of you who did know, so obsessed with Barack Obama. Barack Obama was a black president. Maybe he didn't think that Barack Obama was fit to be in office. He traded on racial animus and racial BS, and he's been doing it for decades. And we're going to sit here and pretend that we're surprised? Why aren't people talking about his, and Carl Bernstein been on CNN for months talking about his fitness for office and what's going on in his head? How can anyone defend what the president said yesterday? It is indefensible. I can't believe people get up here on CNN and on other networks and actually try to defend especially African Americans and Jewish people, to try to defend what Donald Trump said yesterday. There is no defense for what he said yesterday. What he said yesterday was disgusting. It was un-American. And anyone who is an American who believes in this country should be speaking out against this person and saying that it is wrong for him to do this. And anyone who is, let me be plainly clear, anyone who is in that White House and who is supporting him is complicit in their racism as well.
So the question then becomes, Don, and to you, David Axelrod, what do Americans waking up across this country in the heartland on Main Street America, what do they do with that? Because the president won't denounce this, and many people around him won't denounce it and call it out by name and call him out by name. So what does that leave America with this?
Well, first of all, Americans themselves have to pull together and make statements in their own lives that they reject this. They need to call on their elected officials to do it. But let me get back, Poppy, to the question that you asked Chris and put a finer point on it. The reason the Republicans don't speak out is A, they're afraid of Donald Trump and his Twitter account. B, this alt-right group is actually a force within the Republican Party. And they're afraid of taking on Breitbart and that crowd who have given comfort to these groups. And the third is that they've made this Faustian bargain with Donald Trump. If you sign our stuff, if you do the things we want, then we will give you support. And I think that they're going to have to re-examine all of those things right now and decide if they're going to stand up as John McCain stood up and a few others stood up yesterday.
Well, look, you saw it. You saw it with what the president said yesterday, you know, to Don's point about the alt-right, when he was saying to the media, well, you tell me, who's the alt-right? Who's the alt-right? Yep. Go ask Steve Bannon who the alt-right is. He created a base for them in Breitbart, an outlet, a supposed fair media outlet, that it was painfully quiet about what happened in Charlottesville. He doesn't need us to tell him who it is, but it is pretty clear, Chris, he wants to defend these groups and these people in the alt-right. That's why he compares them to the alt-left when there is no such equivalence, and he continues to do so.
Yeah, I wanted to take slight issue with Don's point earlier when he said Donald Trump is ignorant of history. I actually think if that's true, it's the best outcome for Donald Trump. I think if you look at the body of what he has said and done since he has been a candidate, it is difficult to conclude that he's not doing this stuff on purpose with a knowledge. I'm not saying he's a historian, but with a working knowledge of the kind of racially coded language, the provocation that it causes. You know, I think it's virtually impossible now to say, oh, well, he may not know, and I'm not saying this is what Don was saying, but he may not know what he's doing, but it has these impacts. It seems clear to me at this point that a reasonable person would have to conclude he knows exactly what he's doing. And that,
Chris,
and Don made this point.
When I say he's ignorant of history, I'm talking about when he compares George Washington and
Jefferson. Right.
And he doesn't understand why people are upset,
that doesn't
why
make
it's
sense.
Offensive that there's a Robert E. Lee statue.
Well, he says they were all slave owners, so aren't they all the same? Where you have two of them who founded the country, one of them led a treasonous insurrection that killed 600,000 people.
But I feel like I feel like that's the kind of stuff.
Hang on one second.
Yeah, sure, Dave. Sure.
All I wanted to say was, wasn't it in that very building that he began his campaign?
That's right.
With what was essentially a racist appeal. I mean, his campaign was predicated on appeals to bias. And that's not to say that everybody who voted for Donald Trump voted for him for that reason. And I think we ought to make that clear. I think there were a lot of people who voted for him because they were frustrated, with the economy and frustrated with Washington, and he was a vote for change. They weren't signing on for all of this. But at the core of his appeal, certainly at the beginning and throughout the campaign, really, was this racist notion that began at that building on that day when he came down the escalator. So I just echo what I said before, what Don said. This is not a surprise. Donald Trump this wasn't a bait and switch. He ran this way. The thing is, we expected somehow that the presidency would lift him, and clearly that's not going to happen.
And if that's the case, if Donald Trump supporters, and indeed not all of them are racist, the bulk of them are probably not racist, not probably, but are not racist. And so all the more reason for those who are good Americans to stand up against this kind of language and belief with the president. If you believe in the president, then you should speak out and you should let it be known that that behavior that he displayed yesterday was not.
That's why the silence is so problematic from other, look, the Democrats have to stand up, and especially the Republicans have to stand up, David, and they're not. I mean, a tweet doesn't cut it in this situation. It just doesn't. I mean, this is a big moral failing. It's not about politics. And it really is a time for leadership. I mean, if you look at the people who support Trump on social media, right, and that's a big part of where they live, you have these groups that he's empowered. There's no coincidence that David Duke and all those guys were congratulating him and thanking him for what he said yesterday. That tells you everything you need to know. But then you have all these real Republicans who do not espouse bigoted views, who are lost right now. Where are their leaders standing up, reaffirming what their party's about? I just don't get the silence.
They don't espouse bigoted views, but they do benefit from a base within their party that holds them. And so they're afraid to defy that base. They're afraid to defy a president who's proven himself to be spiteful. And they're hopeful that this will blow over and somehow they can move on to tax reform.
But
and
why, David? If you're Paul Ryan and you're saying, okay, I sort of made this bargain so that he can get our legislation through and he can get my agenda through, he's not.
They're benefiting from it. They're the beneficiary of it.
They're keeping their jobs?
Yeah, getting their agenda across.
They're not. They're not getting it through.
But how much? How much? When do Republicans stand up and say,
yeah,
enough is enough? At what cost? Is it, listen, how much of a tax benefit is worth giving away your humanity? How much is a wall going to, how much? I don't understand it. Yeah. I don't understand it.
So well said, John Casey.
Put it in political terms. Sorry, Bobby. Put it in political terms. What will be left of the post-Donald Trump Republican Party if this is allowed to fester? Yeah, I mean, that's. I think the moral question is far more important. Who we are, Don's right. Yeah. Who are we? What are we as a society, right? But even if you look at it in pure political terms, you're not. Being a party that tries to make moral equivalence between white supremacy and people protesting white supremacy, that's not, breaking news, that's not a majority vote in this country. So there's so many reasons why it doesn't make any sense here. And what he is doing is dangerous, genuinely dangerous for our society and for our politics.
And and how long can they say we're the party of Lincoln? And not
only that, it's a betrayal of it's a family betrayal.
I think that ship has sailed.
It's a betrayal of his family. If you look at that soundbite of the guy saying, how can Donald Trump allow his daughter, his beautiful daughter, to marry that B word, Jared Kushner?
No question. Don Lemon, thank you for being here for us. David Axelrod, Chris Salissa, as always. So while politicians aren't doing what they need to do and standing up and leading, faith leaders are. They're weighing in on Charlottesville and the conversation that needs to happen. The rabbi from President Trump's astonishing equivalency between hate groups and those protesting them is leading to many scathing headlines in newspapers across the country. An editorial in the Chicago Sun-Times on the front page calls the president unequivocally America's bigot-in-chief. Joining us now, CNN political commentator and former senior Trump campaign communications advisor Jason Miller is here, and Michael Eric Dyson, author of Tears We Cannot Stop, a sermon to white America. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for being here on such an important morning. Jason, let me begin with you. You're a father. You're a parent. If your children come to you and say, what did you say when the president said what he said yesterday? What will you say?
Well, I think we have to be very careful with our words here. I mean, I'm an American who's very concerned about what I saw on television, what was transpiring this weekend. I think there were two groups that we saw. There was a group that was clearly practicing hate, and there was a group that was clearly standing up and expressing their free speech and their ability to go and push back on such hateful rhetoric. I think it's very important to go and point out here's the fact that we have to stand up to the racists like the terrorist who killed Heather Heyer. And we have to make it very clear that this is not okay. And that's why I was glad to see President Trump stand up and say that these groups, that there absolutely is no place for these groups to be there and to be practicing such hateful rhetoric. I think where the president got off track a bit in some of his comments yesterday is in pointing out some of the images and the violence that we saw on television, that they're were people from all different groups and sides that were fighting. But again, there is no moral equivalency between the hate groups.
Off track a bit? I mean, he said both sides were to blame. Tell your kids that?
Again, what I'm saying is that people who are practicing violence, when we see these images on TV, when we see people punching each other, when we see people fighting, that's not okay. And it doesn't matter who is in that mosh pit or those people who are fighting and going back and forth. But again, Poppy, just so we're being very clear.
It completely matters, too. It completely matters if there are neo-Nazis and KKK and white supremacists, Michael. And another question this morning becomes to you, Michael. There are many Republicans taking to Twitter calling this out, but very few, with the exception of John McCain, calling out the president by name, laying this in the president's lap. And do you know how hard it was to get Republicans to come on this show this morning? You just heard from really the only one who would.
Well, they need to take a page from Beyonce. Say my name. And the reality is that they are not willing to name the reality that we're confronting here, the bigotry that we're confronting here. With all due respect to Mr. Miller, his inability, even though he's courageous enough to come on here this morning, can't even say this is unequivocally wrong. Not the hate that we saw that he has just said, but that the president was wrong. This is not something you would tell your children, even if they're in that, quote, mosh pit and you see people engaging in conflagration. That is nowhere near equivalent to the neo-Nazi, white supremacist, white nationalism that we see articulated with lethal ferocity in this country. So what we have to do is to gird up our loins to say this is wrong. We do have a bigot in chief. The great philosopher and thinker Howard Thurman, a great black preacher, said, a bigot is a person who makes an idol of his or her commitments. The fetish of one's own ideology in the face of such horrendous activity reminds us that this president has amplified the worst bigotry imaginable. We look to the bully pulpit of America from the president to tamp down the things, to say, let's calm down, let's gather up our own moral bearings, and let's move forward. We cannot embrace the kind of racism, the kind of anti-Semitism, the kind of anti-black fervor that we see expressed here. And the inability of the president to say so is one thing. The inability of the Republican Party to name him and to say that this is something we don't represent and is reprehensible is itself a form of bigotry as well.
Jason, when you are being thanked by the former Grand Wizard of the KKK, David Duke, who did just that right after the president's remarks yesterday, thanking him, is that not the ultimate gut check that what you have said is wrong?
Well, we saw a lot of this back during the campaign trail this past year, where you would have these fringe extreme elements, again, who the president has denounced and who he said he wants nothing to do with and does not subscribe or want anything to do with their ideology.
Yet he laid them on the same moral ground. He gave them an equivalency to Nazis.
Poppy, just please let me finish here. The president has rejected those ideologies last year. He's done it during this week. But what we've seen is some of these fringe elements trying to take advantage of the situation and get in there and try to get their name into a news cycle, which is absolutely despicable. But I want to go back to something where I started off at the beginning of this segment here. I made it very clear, where I feel as an American, that there were people who were practicing hate that we absolutely have to condemn, and there were people who were practicing free speech. It is absolutely terrible that Heather Heyer was killed the way that she was, and I think it's absolutely terrible that we're only seeing second-degree murder charges being discussed. I mean, this is an act of domestic terrorism.
So why hasn't the president called her family, Jason?
Well, the president said in his remarks yesterday that he was going to. I can't speak as to why that has happened or hasn't.
It's been 5 days since she was.
But going back to, I just want to be very careful here. Going back to the comments that the gentleman that I'm here speaking with. I mean, I've made it very clear.
Michael Eric Jackson, sir.
Michael, I'm sorry. I've made it very clear that there is no moral equivalency between these groups. Also, what is important to point out, that there is no place for the violence that we were seeing on television this weekend. Regardless of who is in there fighting, there's no place for any of that at all.
So, Michael, the president said that we are, about the monuments, about the Confederate monuments yesterday, that we are trying to erase, we being American people are trying to, trying to erase history, change culture by taking them down. And that sort of completely ignores the fact that they are representing a sanitized, fictionalized history. I mean, if you look back at these beautiful remarks from Mitch Landrieu earlier this year, who quoted the vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, and he talked about that cornerstone speech, and when he said that the great truth is that the N-word is not equal to the white man, that slavery and subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. What did you make of how the president addressed these monuments?
This man is lethally ignorant, incapable of even having a kindergarten's comprehension of the history of race. And for those who say, look, the Confederacy is about history and heritage, it is. The history and heritage of racism, the history and heritage of bigotry, building their sense of biological and in many cases theological and national identity upon a lie, a mythology of white supremacy, the belief that some people are inherently superior and some people are inherently inferior. For the president then to defend the actions against taking down Robert E. Lee or Stonewall Jackson, and remember, these people hated America enough to want to secede from it. The people that we claim, Black Lives Matter, the Antifa movement, and so on, are interested in preserving the fabric of America. Mr. Miller says, again, that there was violence there, but the problem is to equate the violence in reaction against bigotry with the bigotry itself is to misunderstand the fact that when you go to cancer treatment, the radiation is tough treatment, but it is meant to remove the cancer. So what he fails to understand, and what the president especially fails to understand, is that you are complicit with the worst currents of bigotry in this country when you try to draw a false equivalence between secessionists and racists and Confederate defenders and bigots and neo-Nazis and African American and white people and others who have defended the right of this nation to really seek a path of healing beyond the consternation we see now. That's the problem with this president. He ain't got the right moral vision. He doesn't have the right words to express that moral vision, and he lacks an understanding of American history. This is the most illiterate, incompetent president in the history of this nation, and it shows and it tells on him in the midst of this racial crisis where he is incapable of showing basic, decent compassion for those who are vulnerable and who are victims of white supremacy in this country.
Michael, Jason, thank you both for being here on a very important morning. We appreciate it. Chris.
If the president feels like he's been grossly misunderstood and that he didn't want to put out a message about moral equivalence, you know what he would do? He'd tweet about it. Tweets about everything else he doesn't like. He just tweeted this morning, and he's using it to change the subject to something that also matters about Kim Jong-un and North Korea standing down on missile attacks. But he's not dealing with what the country is right now. So that's something for you to think about. Now, over the course of the campaign and the presidency, these issues kept coming up for the president. He says, I was waiting. The president empowering hate is a moral failure, but there's also a matter of fact here. Trump says his second statement in Charlottesville took so long because he was just waiting for the facts.
It was very important to me to get the facts out, and correctly. I couldn't have made it sooner because I didn't know all of the facts. It takes a little while to get the facts. I had to see the facts. I want to know the facts. I want the facts.
This is new. In an interview with Time, he defended his most controversial claims by saying, I predict a lot of things. I'm a very instinctual person, but my instinct turns out to be right. So he doesn't always wait. And the examples of false instincts start in recent memory with the racist birther lie he sponsored about President Obama.
There's something on that birth certificate that he doesn't like.
He may have one, but there's something on that person, maybe religion, maybe it says he's a Muslim. I don't know. It's one of the greatest scams in the history of politics and in the history period. You are not allowed to be a president if you're not born in this country. He may not have been born in this country.
Of people celebrated after 9/11. Remember that?
When the World Trade Center came tumbling down, and I watched in Jersey City, New Jersey, where thousands and thousands of people were cheering as that building was coming down.
Of undocumented immigrants voted illegally. The claim that President Obama tapped Trump's phones. So it's clear President Trump does not wait. And when he's pressed on them, he often backs off. But in Charlottesville, the facts are clear. There were people there to advocate hate, that blacks and Jews and Catholics and ethnics are inferior. One of them acted as a terrorist and killed in furtherance of these beliefs. And there were those who stood against hate. There were two sides. And by failing to clearly denounce hate, the president chose one. His job is to fight injustice and reinforce morality. Stand firm. Did not. Poppy, that is the fact.
It is. Chris, thank you for that. It's critically important this ahead for us. Something you won't want to miss. Families discussed their white nationalist relative marched in Charlottesville. Now his father is disavowing him in a post.
That lady's awesome! I don't see a possum!
Allison Camerata.
Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is New Day. Allison is off. Poppy Harlow is joining me this week. Important day to have you. Thank you for being here.
Of course.
All right, the President of the United States has made it clear he will not completely condemn the hate that led to deadly violence in Charlottesville, Virginia. President Trump's insistence on equating the actions of neo-Nazis and the KKK with those protesting against them has united lawmakers in his own party and much of the country in outrage against his words and apparent lack of moral leadership.
Newspapers this morning across the country condemning the president's remarks with blistering headlines and scathing editorials, and they come as the nation prepares to say a final farewell to Heather Heyer, the 32-year-old Charlottesville woman murdered during Saturday's violence. All of this while another American city removes its Confederate statues under the cover of darkness.
Heather Heyer is going to be placed to rest. Her favorite color was purple. You'll see a lot of purple on people today, and the significance being obvious, remembering her and what she cared about. So, what the president said that has created an entire new turn in this situation. Here's some of it.
Well, I do think there's blame. Yes, I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. What about the alt left that came charging at, excuse me, what about the alt left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt right? Do they have any semblance of guilt? Let me ask you this. What about the fact they came charging with clubs in their hands, swinging clubs? Do they have any problem? I think they do.
Now, this is something that we have not heard in modern history. Somebody openly defending the hateful white supremacist types and what they tried to inflict on a community, this time Charlottesville. Let's discuss with the panel. CNN political analyst John Avlon, David Gregory, and April Ryan. And just because most of this is about moral agency and a failure of it, but the president's making it about facts, our sister network, HBO, Vice News, was out there. Let's just show you a taste of what the president was referring to. Here's what was going on in Charlottesville. Here's what was being said.
That somebody more capable will come along and do that. Somebody like Donald Trump, who does not give his daughter to a Jew.
So Donald Trump, but like more racist.
A lot more racist than Donald Trump. I don't think that you could feel about race the way I do and watch that Kushner bastard walk around with that beautiful girl.
Same people who want to eradicate the president's bloodline, he is defending. David Gregory. He does not have a good argument on the facts. Yes, they had a permit to march. If you look and research where that permit came from, there was a big legal battle about where this should have been held. They fought it. The Nazis, they won in federal court. That's why they get to have it in a way that probably helped motivate the violence. They were also cited for unlawful assembly because of the violence, because of the weaponry. So on the facts, it wasn't all fair what was going on down there.
Right. Look, and in our country, there is freedom of speech and assembly to spread the kind of filth that these neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and others spread. That's what we do in America. We protect people like that, even though they hate Jews and are racist and have a authoritarian ideology. But they also are responsible for killing a woman. There was violence at that rally. That's a question for the police. But of course, these neo-Nazis, they want that. They want the attention. I don't think Vice, I don't think anyone should give them any more attention. There's not much more to learn about white supremacy than the terror that has been inflicted by them over generations in this country. The president here has decided to elevate the arguments of the white supremacists in ways that completely confound Americans of all political stripes. There is no moral equivalency here. It's their right to do what they're doing. It should be condemned, and there should be no other discussion about it. The president has been all over the place on this. Tepid response on Saturday, clearly a forced, tougher statement a couple of days later, and now reverting to. And the president, unlike his predecessors, has decided to whip up social disruption and to deepen, the divisions in our country socially, as opposed to try to tamp down the hatred that an event like this represents.
Yeah, and look, after the president's disastrous press conference, I mean, it was really, in the pantheon of American press conferences, this was a new low by Donald Trump standards or any historic standards. The only people who came out to support him weren't his fellow Republicans. There were a couple of, paid shills doing happy talk on Twitter, but were David Duke and white nationalist, white supremacist leaders. If that doesn't cause a gut check, a reality check on the part of people working in the White House, what will? Because this president seems to have completely abdicated the moral authority that should go with the office of president and the responsibility to at least try and unite the nation.
People standing next to him in his cabinet, Gary Cohn, Stephen Mnuchin, also Jewish, as well as his daughter, his grandchildren. April Ryan, to you as someone who's covered the White House for a long time, questioned this president in the briefing room. This was what was in his heart, what is in his heart. He made that clear in the press conference yesterday. Is this what he meant by Make America Great Again?
I believe so. While he was candidate Trump, many people were saying there were code words that he was using, Make America Great. And the question was, one of my questions was, what time in our history is he talking about America being great that he wanted to go back to? And supporting this yesterday shows us. It's very interesting, and just listening to the conversation all morning and last night, I'm heartsick, but I have several questions this morning. What does Benjamin Netanyahu have to say about this? Because I remember just a few months ago, Benjamin Netanyahu came to the United States and said, Israel has no greater friend than Donald Trump. This is bigger than just everyone talking about the heart and moral authority. And then, I also think about, at the beginning of this president's entrance into the Oval Office, the big story, I remember Zeke Miller made a mistake talking about the King bust wasn't there. But the reason why it was such a big deal is because so many people were concerned about the president's heart and his mind when it came to issues of inclusion and race. And that statue is still in the Oval Office, well, at least last we checked. Well, so those are two things that make me question this morning.
Well, David, look, here's the going concern now. We know what the president said. We know what his defense for it is. And frankly, it was weighed and measured and found lacking. So where is the response from leadership? I see the tweets. We'll put them up there for you. Paul Ryan, Rubio, John McCain. They should live by their own rule. When they say, tweets don't really matter. We disagree with them when it comes to the president, but it does matter about right now. I know you're on vacation, but, bad situations don't wait for you to be in session. Where are they calling out this president, marshaling moral agents, telling this country what matters, and appealing to our better angels? They're not doing it, David, and the silence is deafening.
Right. It is, and it's a failure of leadership, and it's a failure of moral leadership, because the obligation here for leaders in Congress and national leadership inside and outside of politics is to try to soothe the divisions, to try to bring down the roar a little bit here. It is a mistake if we're going to allow, whether it's President Trump or his defenders, to say this is an argument about political correctness or caving into the far left. That's completely bogus. I mean, this is just morally wrong. The fact that we're allowing white supremacists to be on the forefront of a conversation about national memory and history, it is wrong. This was, without any doubt, wrong what happened in Charlottesville. This was an act of domestic terror on the part of domestic terrorists, white supremacists, period. There's nothing about how there were other people involved. So there's an obligation to speak out against the president who's only deepening the division in the country. This is not Donald Trump who started all of this. These problems between African Americans and so many communities here and the police, or questions about national memory, these are not new questions, but they need to be shepherded in a way that's responsible by our leadership.
And John Avlon, the question becomes, what do they do? What will fellow Republicans do? It's easy. It's easy to say bigotry is wrong. It's easy to say hatred is wrong. Everyone should be able to say that in their sleep. It is John McCain pretty much alone who was actually naming the president, calling out the president in a tweet. But where are all of the other Republicans calling out the president by name, laying this in his lap, and then acting?
And that's what we need, I think, to watch for today. Who will call out the president by name? Because increasingly Republicans have realized that they feel the freedom to speak their mind when it comes to Donald Trump, that there may not be the political price to pay that they feared. And instead, I'd flip the question. And this goes for people serving in the administration as well. There are good people serving for patriotic reasons, in part because they're trying to contain the president's worst instincts. But the look you saw on General Kelly's face yesterday was someone who realized that, you know what, you're not going to be able to change this man, and that there's a question about not only the political cost, but the personal cost of going down with this particular ship. Because Donald Trump is almost single-handedly erasing the legacy for the party of Lincoln, the people who like to claim that memory. And while that problem's been growing for a while, it now is undeniable. And it's amounting to basically a political suicide note for a party that wishes to reach out to the millennial generation and beyond.
Right, but April, he made his stand. You know, the president did it. Whether or not it's because the media backed him in a corner and he doesn't like being blamed, and Fred Trump, you know, Roy Cohn and all that other stuff that they spin about his battle mentality, or it's just that this is what is in his heart. And if you change the facts and it's ISIS who's doing this and not the KKK, he'd go crazy about it. But when it's these white supremacist types, it doesn't get him as angry. Regardless, we know where he is on this. But where is Ryan? Where is McConnell? Where is Ted Cruz? Where are these people who wanted to be president? I think they have to be measured by this as well. And if they're doing it in furtherance of an agenda, well, we want to get our stuff, we want to get that infrastructure bill passed. Moral agency matters too, does it not, April Ryan?
Yes, it does, Chris Cuomo. Here's the bottom line. People in Washington are very afraid of the president's thumbs, his 140 characters, particularly those in his party. But now it's time to say, am I going to be afraid or am I going to stand up? And, you know, people are also still concerned. There's still a sizable amount of the American population who supported this president, who believe this stuff. And I love David Gregory so much, but I'm going to say this. I do believe we need to show this. I do believe we need to hear what's said so people understand fully where this president's mind is. But we need to also understand and find out where the mind and the power is behind the Republican Party. I mean, there are African-American Republicans now very upset about this. They're meeting with the RNC this morning about this. I mean, I'm in the Baltimore area right now. Just got off the phone before we went on the air with the mayor of Baltimore, Catherine Pugh, who called me with conviction. We took all of those statues, the Confederate statues down, 4 of them. I mean, you know, people have to, what is it? Don't tell me, show me. You have to show that you're really standing where you stand. And not speaking is complacency.
Also, I think there's the political dimension to this. And I mean, I take April's point. I mean, I would just argue that there are limits to how much aggrandizing of this movement you want to do, and we understand what it is. We might apply that thinking to, you know, propaganda videos, say, from ISIS. We might want to curtail how much we show of those. But on this point, too, the larger political question, look, you have CEOs who are dropping off his advisory council. This is getting beyond his core base. So Republicans have got to start to worry about whether he's ever going to get to the agenda items that they are counting on. You see risk-averse CEOs, part of the business constituency for Donald Trump for years, and now President Trump, getting more and more uncomfortable with him. These are the things that he's got to be thinking about in the broader term of his presidential leadership.